December 24th began with a wind so sharp it seemed to scrape the skin off the bones. In Anchorage, Alaska, winter didn't come to play, it came to break. Before the sun even hinted at rising, the streets were already coated in a hard layer of ice, and the sky above looked like it had been painted shut with a brush dipped in iron. There was no warmth, no softness, just grey, just silence, just cold. Yet, scattered along the frozen streets, the blinking of Christmas lights brought an eerie contrast. Red, green, and gold colors danced behind frosted glass windows, signs of life, of celebration, of warmth. Inside the homes, families were still asleep or just waking up, unaware of the scene unfolding beyond the comfort of their fireplaces and flannel pajamas. On the corner of 6th and L Street, under the dim halo of a flickering street lamp, a lone figure pushed forward, cutting through the cold like a shadow that didn't belong. The wheels of the old shopping cart clanked and whined with each movement, one of them wobbling uselessly, dragging a crooked line in the snow behind her. The cart was filled to the brim with things that looked like trash to anyone else. Worn-out books, a broken toaster, a doll missing an eye, rusted tins, and a thick woolen blanket tied in a knot. But to her, each item had weight. Each piece was memory. Her name was Emery Whitlow, 78 years old, a former nurse, now a ghost in her own city. She was layered in clothing that didn't match, a men's winter coat 3 sizes too big, a scarf that had once been red but was now a dull brown, a pair of boots with the soles duct taped to keep out the snow. Her eyes, a faded blue, were sunken but watchful. Her face, weathered and lined, carried stories no one had asked to hear in years. Most passers-by didn't notice her. Those who did looked away quickly. There was something about Emery that unsettled people. Not because she was dangerous, not because she asked for anything, she didn't, but because she forced them to see what they didn't want to. Loneliness, age, loss, the uncomfortable possibility that anyone, given the right storm of events, could end up just like her. Even the volunteers from the nearby church, who came once a week with food and blankets, avoided direct conversation. They meant well, but they always left things at a distance, like they were afraid she might pull them into her world if they got too close. Emery never chased anyone, never explained herself. She'd learned a long time ago that no one really wanted the full truth. People liked charity, not stories, and her story was the kind that stuck in your throat. The wind picked up as she turned onto a quieter street, lined with older houses wrapped in strings of lights. A plastic snowman lay tipped over in someone's yard, half buried in the snowdrift. She paused, her breath puffing into the air like steam from a kettle. Her joints ached. Her fingertips burned under her gloves. But there was no room for complaint. Complaining was for people with options. Her mind was sharp, though the cold made everything slower. She calculated time by the streetlights switching off, the bakery opening its back door, and the faint sound of a train in the distance. These things grounded her, gave her a kind of rhythm in a world that had no more schedules for her. She passed a small cafe, the windows fogged with heat from inside. She could smell the cinnamon rolls, feel the faint memory of warm hands around a coffee cup. Once, long ago, this would have been her stop on the way to work. She used to love Christmas Eve shifts, the quiet, the patients who just needed comfort, the nurses laughing between rounds. Now, she stood outside looking in like someone from another life. A couple walked out of the cafe, laughing, bumping into each other with the playfulness of people who didn't know real fear. One of them saw Emery and stiffened slightly, pulling the other by the arm. They walked past her without a word. She didn't react. She didn't need pity. Her life had been reduced to survival, yes, but not shame. The cold was starting to seep through her layers now, finding the softest parts of her body and making them ache. She turned down an alley, one of her usual shortcuts, leading toward a place few others ever went willingly, the underpass near the edge of town, where the wind was cut off by concrete walls and the snow didn't gather quite as high. This was her home. Hidden beneath the overpass, next to a row of abandoned shopping carts and a rusted bicycle frame, Emery had built something that resembled shelter. A faded green camping tent, patched with black tape, sat on a flattened mattress. Around it, small objects marked her territory: a chipped coffee mug, a plastic crate she used as a table, a folding chair missing one leg. She had everything she needed. Or at least, that's what she told herself every night before she closed her eyes. Inside the tent, the cold was different. Less brutal, more intimate. The kind of cold that lived in the bones, in the space behind the heart. She sat down, unzipping her coat slowly, and reached for a worn thermos. The tea inside was barely warm, but it was something. She sipped it with care, like it cost a fortune. Outside, the city prepared for celebration. Gifts were wrapped, ovens were preheating, children were waking up with excitement in their chests. But in the shadows of Anchorage, a woman who once saved lives was now just trying to stay alive. She lay back, staring at the ceiling of her tent, the nylon stained from years of use, and let her mind wander. She thought of a name she hadn't spoken in weeks. She thought of a voice she could no longer hear clearly. She thought of what it meant to be forgotten. And as the snow began to fall again, silently layering the world in white, Emery Whitlow closed her eyes and whispered a promise to herself. Just make it through tonight. She had no idea that, somewhere across town, her name still lived in someone's memory, and that by the time Christmas Day came, her life would never be the same. If you like interesting stories, leave your like, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated with all our content. And let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. We'd love to hear from you. Most people had already forgotten what Christmas Eve was like without family, without warmth, without someone saying your name. But for Emery Whitlow, that kind of loneliness had become so normal it barely registered anymore. She lay inside her tent under the bridge, wrapped in a sleeping bag that smelled faintly of mildew and smoke. The wind outside howled through the concrete pillars, shaking the loose tops that lined her shelter like warning whispers. Her body trembled, not from fear, not anymore, but from the cold that had found a home in her bones. She wasn't sleeping. She rarely did for more than an hour at a time. Her mind, even in the dark, kept wandering. But this time, it wandered back, to a hospital hallway. Bright white floors. A woman screaming behind a curtain. Monitors beeping. A crying newborn being taken away. And her, Emery, gloved hands stained with effort, eyes sharp, voice calm, as she stood by a woman who had just lost her child. That memory always came back in pieces, some clearer than others. She remembered the feel of the woman's hand gripping hers so tightly she thought her bones would snap. She remembered whispering something. What was it? About breathing, about surviving pain. The face of the woman was a blur now, but the emotion stayed. Raw, endless. Back in the present, Emery coughed into her sleeve. Her breath was shallow, uneven. Her chest had been aching for 2 days now, and she knew well enough what that meant. But she refused to go to the hospital. Not again. Not like this. If this was her time, she'd rather meet it on her terms, with her dignity still intact. Because that was the one thing she hadn't given up. Not after she lost her son. Not after her husband forgot her name. Not even after the eviction notice came, taped to the apartment door like an afterthought. She had been a nurse for 40 years. She had held the hands of dying men and women who were nothing but skin and sorrow. She had watched children take their first breaths and others take their last. She had cleaned blood and vomit and tears with the same calm. She had comforted strangers when their own families couldn't. And yet, here she was, under a bridge, forgotten by the city she had once served. The irony didn't sting anymore. It just existed. After her husband, Franklin, had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, everything began to unravel. She cared for him for 6 years, alone. There was no money for a private facility, no family to help. Just her and the man she loved, slowly fading into someone who didn't know who she was. And then one night, he didn't wake up. His body gave out before his mind did. 3 months later, her only son, David, was hit by a drunk driver 2 blocks from his apartment. He died instantly. No goodbyes. No warning. Just silence. That was the day the world went quiet for her. Everything that followed felt like moving underwater. Slow, blurry, distant. Her pension couldn't cover rent anymore. Friends stopped calling, unsure of what to say. She bounced between spare rooms and temporary kindness until even that ran dry. By the time she was offered a bed in a shelter, it felt more like a cage than a refuge. She walked out and never looked back. Now, her hands were curled around her knees inside the sleeping bag. She felt the ache in her joints like small knives, and she pressed her forehead against her arm. She wasn't crying. She hadn't cried in years. Not because she didn't want to, but because the tears just stopped coming one day. Like her body had decided it had spilled enough. Outside, a truck passed overhead, sending vibrations down the bridge. Her tent shuddered. She checked the zipper on the entrance, adjusted the blanket blocking the wind, then slowly reached for a small photo she kept inside a plastic sandwich bag tucked in her coat pocket. It was worn, edges soft from handling. A young man, maybe 25, smiling beside a scruffy dog. Her son, David, always smiling in photos. He had his father's crooked teeth and her quiet eyes. "Still with me," she whispered, tapping her finger gently against the bag. "Aren't you, baby?" It was the only voice she used anymore, the soft one she reserved for ghosts. Suddenly, her body shivered harder than before. A wave of dizziness swept over her, and she leaned back, eyes fluttering closed. The fever she had ignored for days was beginning to grip tighter. She could feel it now, deep inside her lungs. Each breath was a little harder than the last. She whispered again, but this time, it wasn't to David. "If I don't wake up tomorrow, let it be quiet. No ambulance. No fuss." But fate, as always, had other plans. Several miles away, in the heart of Anchorage's wealthiest neighborhood, a fire crackled inside a stone fireplace. The air was scented with pine, cinnamon, and wood smoke. A towering Christmas tree stood in a corner, decked in gold ornaments and wrapped in twinkling lights. It was the kind of scene people dreamed about. In that house, laughter echoed from a nearby room. Children's feet padded across polished wood floors. A man in his 70s, tall, stiff posture, clean-shaven, with hands that had long forgotten manual labor, was pouring hot chocolate into tiny mugs. His name was Whitaker Donovan, and the lives of these 2 strangers, Emery, alone in the cold, and Whitaker, surrounded by everything money could buy, were about to collide in a way that neither of them could predict. But for now, neither knew the other existed, and Emery, under that bridge, drifted into a restless sleep, unaware that her story wasn't finished. Not yet. The Donovan estate sat on a gentle hill, overlooking a frozen lake that reflected the soft flicker of the Christmas lights strung along the rooftops. Inside the house, everything spoke of wealth, but not just wealth. Control, presentation. Nothing was out of place. Not the placement of the centerpiece on the dining table. Not the perfectly ironed bows on the stair railings. Not even the scent, which was carefully curated. warm vanilla for balsam and just a hint of cedar. And standing at the center of it all, quietly watching his grandchildren sip cocoa beside the fire, was Whitaker Donovan. To anyone who didn't know better, Whitaker looked like the portrait of holiday joy, a man who had built an empire from the ground up and now enjoyed the fruits of a life well planned. His business, a transportation logistics firm with national reach, was known for its seasonal generosity. Toy drives, food donations, press conferences with smiling children. There were photos of him shaking hands with city officials, smiling with local pastors, even holding orphaned puppies for the cameras. But inside his home, the silence between him and his only daughter was the one thing that money couldn't dress up. Mallory stood in the hallway, just out of reach of the firelight, her arms crossed over her chest, watching her father through the open arch of the living room. She was 37, a pediatrician with the kind of presence that made kids trust her and adults listen. Her voice, though gentle with patience, had an edge when speaking to Whitaker, the result of too many years of unresolved tension. They hadn't had a real conversation in over 3 years. Not since her mother, his wife of 35 years, was forced out of the house during what Mallory still called the exile. Whitaker had his version of the story. Mallory had hers. But what mattered was that her mother, who once filled this house with laughter, had left one night with nothing but a suitcase and silence. Since then, Mallory's visits had been obligatory, brief, and strained. Tonight was no different, at least not yet. Mallory tucked her dark hair behind her ear and walked toward the fireplace, where her 2 young sons sat cross-legged on a thick rug, laughing over a game with toy dinosaurs. "You two need to calm down before you spill that cocoa all over the rug," she said with a faint smile. Her father turned toward her with a look that resembled affection but stopped just short. "They're just excited," he said. "Let them enjoy the night. It's Christmas Eve." Mallory didn't answer. Instead, she walked to the window and looked out, just for a moment, seeking something beyond the glass. And that's when she saw her. Near the edge of the property, just beyond the gate where the driveway curved toward the main road, a figure was slumped against the fence, barely visible in the snow. The motion sensor light above the garage had clicked on, casting a weak glow across the frozen path. At first, Mallory thought it might have been a trick of the light, a shadow, or maybe one of the local animals. But as she leaned closer, her breath caught. It was a woman, thin, hunched, not moving much, but definitely alive. Mallory didn't hesitate. She grabbed the nearest blanket from the couch, pulled on her coat, and headed toward the door. "Where are you going?" Whitaker asked, startled. "There's someone outside," she said, already moving. "She's on the ground." Before he could respond, she was out the door, boots crunching on the ice-covered stone path. The air hit her like a slap, bitter and sharp, but she pushed forward, crossing the yard and stepping through the unlocked gate. The woman was curled against the base of the fence, one arm wrapped around a bag, the other limp at her side. Her face was mostly hidden beneath layers of cloth, but Mallory saw the color of her skin, pale, almost gray, and the way her lips trembled with each shallow breath. Mallory knelt beside her. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" No response. She unfolded the blanket and wrapped it around the woman's shoulders, touching her gently. That's when the woman stirred, just enough to shift her head, and her face turned slightly toward the light. Mallory froze. She knew that face. It was older now, worn and sunken, the skin stretched thinner, the hair more brittle. But the eyes, even in their haze, sparked a memory so strong it nearly knocked her backward. "I know you," Mallory whispered, her voice catching. The woman squinted, as if trying to place the voice, the shape. "You," Mallory said again, her heart racing. "You were there, at the hospital, years ago. You were my nurse." The snow swirled around them, the wind biting through Mallory's gloves, but she didn't move. This wasn't just any woman. This was her, the nurse who had sat by her side the night Mallory lost her first child. The memory hit with brutal clarity. She had been 29, newly married, pregnant with a baby girl she already loved. The delivery had come too early, too fast. She had bled. The baby hadn't cried. And after the chaos, the machines, the screaming, the only person who had stayed in that cold, white room was a nurse named Emery, who hadn't said much, who had simply held her hand and whispered, "You're still here. That means something." Now, that same woman lay on the ground in front of her, broken by time and circumstance, discarded like she no longer mattered. Mallory's eyes welled with tears, not from pity, but from the sheer injustice of it. "Emery," she said aloud. "Your name is Emery, isn't it?" This time, the woman blinked slowly. Her voice came out rough, barely a whisper. "Yes." Mallory reached into her coat pocket, pulled out her phone, and dialed. "I need you to stay with me, okay? I'm going to help you." "I'm not a charity case," Emery murmured. "You're not," Mallory said firmly. "You're a human being. That's enough." Within minutes, the garage door opened, and Mallory helped Emery inside. Not into the house, not yet, but into the heated garage, where she laid her down gently on a cot covered with clean towels. The warmth hit Emery like a wave, and she coughed hard, her breath rattling in her chest. Mallory prepared a cup of tea, added honey, and crouched beside her. Emery's hands trembled as she held the cup. Mallory said nothing. Not yet. Because some stories needed to unfold in silence first. But one thing was already clear. This night, this freezing, quiet, forgettable night, had just become the beginning of something that neither of them could have imagined. The garage had once been used to store Whittaker Donovan's luxury SUV. That night, it became a sanctuary. Dimly lit by a single overhead bulb and warmed by a standing heater, Mallory rolled in from the basement. It smelled faintly of oil, dust, and peppermint from an old air freshener still hanging on the wall. The cot was thin, the blankets borrowed from the guest room, and the tea was a blend she used for her kids when they were sick. But to Emery, it might as well have been a five-star suite. She hadn't felt this kind of warmth in months. Not just the temperature, but the warmth of someone seeing her, of a human voice speaking to her with care instead of fear, of hands that reached out without flinching. But her body didn't trust it yet. She lay under the blankets, eyes half open, lips pale, her breath still shallow and wheezing. Mallory had slipped a small pillow under her head and sat close by on an overturned storage bin, watching her carefully. Not hovering, just present. Outside, the wind howled. A branch scraped against the roof. Somewhere deeper in the house, the distant murmur of Christmas music filtered through the walls. But inside the garage, there was silence between the two women, until Emery broke it. "I remember you now," she rasped. Mallory straightened. "You do." Emery gave the faintest nod, her voice cracked but steady. "The girl who held her stomach like it was made of glass. I sat with you for hours." Mallory swallowed hard. "You were the only person who didn't look at me like I was broken." "You weren't broken," Emery said. "You were grieving." They sat in that truth for a while. Mallory looked at her, really looked. Emery's skin was paper thin, her cheeks sunken, her fingers curled slightly, the knuckles red with cold. And yet, beneath all that, there was still a quiet strength in her. A woman who had known too much pain and had somehow kept walking. "Why didn't you tell anyone who you were?" Mallory asked gently. "You were a nurse. You helped so many people. You didn't deserve to be out there in the snow." Emery blinked slowly. Deserve has nothing to do with it. She coughed again, and Mallory handed her a tissue. I lost my husband first, Emery said. Alzheimer's. Took him piece by piece. I kept him home until the end. People said I was crazy for doing it myself, but I couldn't let strangers put their hands on him when he didn't even know his own name. Mallory listened in silence. Then my son. Emery paused. Her eyes drifted toward the ceiling, like she was searching for the right words somewhere in the rafters. He died on a Tuesday. A drunk driver. I didn't even get to say goodbye. The cops came to my door, and that was it. That's all it took to erase my entire world. Mallory felt the ache settle in her chest. After that, the apartment went, Emery continued. I couldn't work. Didn't care to. The pension didn't stretch far. The rest? Well, you can guess the rest. Mallory looked down. I'm sorry. I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry, Emery said, with more strength now. I'm telling you because I don't want to disappear without someone knowing I was here. That I existed. Mallory nodded. She felt a lump rising in her throat but didn't speak. I turned down shelters, Emery added. They take away your privacy, your things, put you in rooms with strangers and call it help. But I'd already lost enough. I wasn't going to give up the last piece of myself just to have a roof. There was no bitterness in her tone, just fact. Mallory stood up slowly. You need antibiotics. And fluids. Your lungs don't sound good. I have a friend. He's a doctor. I'll call him, but we'll keep it quiet. My father. He doesn't need to know yet. Emery gave a faint smile. Still hiding secrets under the roof of men who think they own everything? Mallory chuckled, despite herself. Some habits are hard to break. She left the garage quietly and returned minutes later with a medical bag and a phone pressed to her ear. She whispered instructions to her friend on the other end, then hung up and got to work. Emery winced as she took her temperature, checked her pulse, and gave her medication to bring the fever down. Rest now, Mallory said, tucking the blanket gently around her. I'll stay close. Emery closed her eyes, but her hand reached out suddenly, catching Mallory's wrist. You have children? Mallory hesitated. Yes, 2 boys. Good, Emery murmured. Don't ever let them forget your face. Then she drifted into sleep. Hours passed. The house above continued its celebration. Guests arriving, laughter echoing, music playing. Whitaker mingled, smiling for photos, raising glasses, pretending the world outside his walls didn't exist. But Mallory checked the garage every 20 minutes, each time hoping that the heat would be enough, that the medicine would work, that Emery would still be breathing. Just after 2 in the morning, Emery stirred again. Her eyes opened slowly. Her face was damp with sweat, but her voice was clearer. Why'd you help me? She asked. Mallory sat down beside her, brushing a strand of hair from Emery's forehead. Because you helped me once, when no one else could. I don't remember what I said to you. You didn't need to say anything. You just stayed. That was enough. Emery looked away, as if not used to being seen with this much kindness. I don't know why, she whispered, but it feels like tonight mattered. Mallory held her hand. It does. And it's not over yet. And neither of them knew that upstairs, someone else had noticed. From the top of the stairs, Whitaker Donovan had seen the light under the garage door. He'd heard the door open. He'd seen his daughter slipping in and out, carrying things, whispering on the phone, hiding something. And just before dawn, curiosity turned to suspicion. The next day, Christmas would arrive with more than gifts. It would come with confrontation, and nothing in the Donovan house would stay untouched. Christmas morning broke with a silence that felt almost too perfect, the kind of silence that doesn't just come from snow, but from tension hiding beneath the surface, the hush before something snaps. Upstairs in the Donovan mansion, the smell of cinnamon rolls baking in the oven drifted through the hallways. Wrapping paper rustled. Children's laughter echoed through the rooms. From the outside, it was a picture-perfect holiday, the kind that made its way into glossy magazines or real estate ads. But Mallory barely noticed. She hadn't slept. Her eyes were heavy, her mind alert, her body moving on instinct as she checked on Emery again. The woman had slept through most of the early morning, her fever now lower, her breathing a little steadier. Mallory had brought her a soft sweater from the back of her closet and a bowl of warm oatmeal she hadn't touched yet. Still, Emery's skin remained pale, her energy low. She spoke little, not from reluctance, but from fatigue. Her voice, when it came, was soft and distant, like someone speaking from far away. "Is it Christmas?" she asked faintly, stirring the oatmeal with a spoon she didn't intend to use. "It is," Mallory said. "December 25th. Emery let out a dry, ironic chuckle. "Never thought I'd spend it in a millionaire's garage." Mallory smiled, but there was worry in her eyes. "You're safe. That's all that matters right now." But it wasn't, and they both knew it. Because behind the walls of that house, not everyone was at peace. Whitaker stood by the window in his study, a crystal tumbler of scotch in one hand, watching the light layer of snow settle over the backyard. The house was full of voices, clinking dishes, the faint notes of a holiday playlist playing in the background. But his focus was elsewhere. Something was wrong. He knew it. He'd seen the way Mallory moved the night before, the urgency in her steps, the secrecy in her voice. He'd checked the security monitor that morning and replayed the footage from the side yard. She wasn't just sneaking around. She was hiding someone. Whitaker had built an empire on logistics, efficiency, and reading people. He could spot a lie before it was spoken. And whatever was happening in his garage wasn't just a favor or a lost pet or an accident. It was deliberate. He took one last sip and set the glass down on the windowsill. Enough was enough. Mallory was about to return to the garage with another cup of tea when she heard his footsteps. Slow, deliberate, heavy with purpose. She turned just as Whitaker entered the mudroom that connected to the garage door. "What's going on?" he asked. Mallory didn't flinch. "I'm busy." "I'm not asking about your schedule, Mallory," he said, his voice calm but sharp. "I'm asking who you've brought into my house." Her jaw tightened. "She's in the garage, not the house. Don't play word games with me. You know exactly what I mean." For a moment, neither of them moved. The distance between them had never felt wider. "She's sick," Mallory said finally. "I couldn't leave her out there. You could have called an ambulance, a shelter, literally anyone but me. She didn't want an ambulance, and I didn't trust a shelter to keep her alive through the night." Whitaker's eyes narrowed. "So you decided to make my home a charity ward?" "No," Mallory snapped. "I decided to save the life of a woman who once saved mine." He blinked. That part he hadn't expected. "What are you talking about?" Mallory's voice softened, but her words were clear. "Years ago, when I lost the baby, she was my nurse. She stayed with me when no one else did. She's not a stranger. Her name is Emery, and I'm not going to pretend she doesn't matter just because it's inconvenient." There was a silence that followed, heavy enough to crush the air in the room. Whitaker opened his mouth, then closed it. His face, always so composed, shifted slightly. Just enough for Mallory to see the crack behind the mask. "I built this house for family," he said quietly. "And what does that even mean to you anymore?" Mallory asked. "Because it hasn't meant warmth, or loyalty, or forgiveness for a long time." She wasn't yelling. She didn't need to. Whitaker looked down, as if searching for words he hadn't used in years. Then he turned toward the door. "I want her gone by morning." Mallory felt the words hit her like a slap. "You don't even know her." "I don't need to know her," he snapped. "This is my home. My rules." Mallory stepped in front of him. "Then maybe this isn't home anymore." For the first time in years, she saw something flicker in his eyes, something that looked like doubt, maybe even shame. But he said nothing, just brushed past her and walked away. Back in the garage, Emery looked up as Mallory returned. She didn't need to ask. She could read the expression on her face as if it were her own. "He wants me gone," Emery said, matter of fact. Mallory nodded slowly. "Not yet. He doesn't understand." Emery sipped her tea, then looked away. "Don't fight your father over me. It's not worth it." "You're wrong," Mallory said softly. "You're worth more than you think." Emery didn't respond. Her eyes stayed on the floor, on a spot where melted snow had gathered in a tiny puddle beneath her cot. But inside her, something had shifted. Something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. Hope. Just a flicker. Just enough. The dining room table was set for 14. Fine china, polished silverware, linen napkins folded into crisp triangles. Crystal glasses shimmered in the warm light of the chandelier. The centerpiece, a carefully arranged blend of white roses, pine cones, and gold-painted leaves, stretched across the middle of the table like a line drawn between two worlds, one of abundance and another of absence. Whitaker Donovan sat at the head of the table, as always. He wore a charcoal grey sweater over a white collared shirt, the kind of effortless wealth that didn't need to be spoken out loud. To his left sat his sister, Diane, a widow who divided her year between Alaska and Palm Springs. To his right, the grandkids, a blur of movement, excitement, and frosting from the cupcakes they devoured earlier. Across from him sat Mallory. She was quieter than usual, still, focused. Her plate remained mostly untouched. Her boys leaned on her arms, giggling about their presents, but she wasn't fully present. Her eyes flicked toward the hallway every few minutes, toward the door that led to the garage. Emery was still there, resting, stable, for now. But Mallory could feel the tension building, and she knew it was only a matter of time before something snapped again. The dinner conversation floated around her, Diane recounting a story from the cruise she'd taken last spring, one of the nephews bragging about his acceptance into Northwestern, Whitaker laughing politely, nodding at all the right moments. But there was a strain behind his eyes. His thoughts were elsewhere too, and finally he spoke. "So, Mallory," he said, setting down his wine glass, "how long do you plan to keep your patient in my garage?" Every fork stopped moving. The table fell silent. Mallory looked up slowly. "Until she's strong enough to stand without collapsing. Maybe another day or two." Whitaker smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's generous of you, though I don't remember agreeing to run a shelter out of my home." "She's not homeless," Mallory replied calmly. "She's Emery Whitlow. She was a nurse for 40 years. She lived in this city her entire life. She raised a family here. She buried them. She gave more to this world than most people at this table." Whitaker's jaw flexed, but he kept his tone even. And that entitles her to sleep in my garage during a private family holiday? She didn't ask for anything. I made the decision, because I couldn't walk past her and pretend I didn't see her. She's not your responsibility, Mallory. That's where you're wrong. Mallory turned slightly in her seat, her voice stronger now, louder than the conversation had been moments before. When I lost my baby, I thought I was going to lose my mind. No one, not my husband, not my friends, not even you, knew what to say to me. People sent flowers and disappeared. But she stayed. That woman, lying out there in your garage, sat beside me while I fell apart. And she didn't flinch. She didn't look away. Diane shifted uncomfortably in her seat. One of the boys stopped chewing. Even the music from the living room felt quieter. She held my hand, Mallory continued, and told me I'd survive the grief. And then she left the room, and I never saw her again. Until last night, when I found her collapsed in the snow outside your gate. She must have come here on purpose, Whitaker muttered. No, Mallory said sharply. She didn't even know where she was. It was coincidence. Or maybe it was something bigger, I don't know. But I don't care. Because the moment I saw her, I remembered what it felt like to be seen by someone who didn't owe me anything. The room was silent again. Everyone stared at their plates. No one wanted to argue with her. Not in that tone. Not with her eyes burning like that. Finally, Whitaker leaned back in his chair, exhaling through his nose. So what do you want from me? He asked. Approval? A medal? I want compassion, Mallory said simply. I want you to remember what it means to care about people who can't do anything for you. Whitaker's fingers tapped the table once, then again. He looked away for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was low. You know what I remember, he said. I remember working 80 hours a week to build a company from nothing. I remember paying off a mortgage when interest rates were choking us. I remember your mother looking me in the eyes and telling me I was never present enough for this family, and then walking out, leaving me to pick up the pieces. Mallory stared at him. She didn't leave. You pushed her out. You don't know the full story. No, she agreed, because you never told it. Whitaker stood suddenly, the scrape of his chair harsh against the polished floor. Dinner's over. He walked out of the room without another word. Mallory sat back in her chair, heart pounding, not with regret, but with something deeper, a strange sense of clarity. For the first time, she hadn't just stood up to her father. She had stood up for someone else. Someone who had once done the same for her. And upstairs, the walls of that house, thick with wealth, tradition, and pride, had just begun to crack. In the garage, Emery coughed softly in her sleep, unaware that her story had just been placed at the center of a family's long-buried storm. But the truth had been spoken, and now, nothing could be the same. If you're enjoying this story, leave your like, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated with all our content. The next morning arrived not with drama, but with stillness. The kind of stillness that follows a storm. Quiet, tentative, but charged with the weight of something that has shifted. In the Donovan home, things were no longer where they had been. Not on the surface, maybe, but deep beneath it. In the way people looked at each other, in the way voices softened. Mallory woke before sunrise, her body sore from a night spent half asleep in a chair beside Emery's cot. She stretched slowly, her breath fogging in the still cool air of the garage. Emery was still asleep, her face peaceful, her breathing easier than it had been since the night Mallory found her. A small miracle. She stood up, careful not to wake her, and slipped quietly into the mudroom, then into the kitchen. The house was still dark. The Christmas decorations were still up, garlands over the windows, a wreath on the back door, the tree still blinking softly in the living room. But the air had changed. For once, it didn't feel like a showroom. As she poured herself a cup of coffee, she heard a sound, the soft click of a door, the light steps of someone awake earlier than usual. Whitaker appeared in the doorway a second later. They looked at each other, not like enemies, not even like family. Just two people who had finally seen something real in the other. "You slept out there all night?" he asked quietly. "I didn't want to leave her alone," Mallory said. Whitaker nodded. He stepped into the kitchen, poured himself a cup, then stood across from her, both leaning against opposite counters. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he asked, "She doing any better?" "Much. The fever broke last night. She's still weak, but I think she's going to pull through." "I'm glad," he said, and he meant it. Mallory studied him. The way his hands held the mug. The way his shoulders slumped slightly now, as if he'd finally put something down after carrying it too long. "You really meant what you said last night?" she asked. He looked up, met her eyes. "I meant every word." Mallory nodded slowly. "Then I need to tell you something." He raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. "She left this morning," Mallory said. Whitaker straightened, confused. "Who?" "Emery." He stared at her, blinking slowly. "You're serious?" Mallory nodded. "I went out to check on her before the kids woke up. The cot was empty. The blankets folded. The tea thermos cleaned and left by the heater. All she left was a note." She reached into her sweater pocket and pulled out a folded scrap of paper. She handed it to him. Whitaker took it carefully, unfolding it like something sacred. It was handwritten, the letters shaky but clear. "Thank you for reminding me that not everyone looks away. Emery." He stared at the paper for a long time. "I don't understand," he finally said. "Why would she leave?" Mallory exhaled. "Because people like her. They've spent years surviving on their own. And the moment they feel like they're becoming someone's burden, they vanish. That's how they stay in control. She left before we could say goodbye, or before she got too attached." Whitaker sat down at the table, the note still in his hand. Mallory sat across from him. "I should have gone to her last night," he said quietly. "Not to make things right. Just to listen." Mallory touched his hand, a small gesture, but enough. "We're not done," she said. "We're going to find her." Whitaker looked up at her. "And if she doesn't want to be found? Then we'll keep looking anyway," Mallory said. "Because no one should be allowed to disappear." The hours that followed were frantic. Mallory called hospitals, shelters, former co-workers from the hospital where Emery used to work. She even posted discreetly in a few local online groups, asking if anyone had seen an older woman in a green coat near Midtown. Whitaker, meanwhile, drove. Personally. No driver, no assistant. Just him behind the wheel of his black SUV, eyes scanning every corner, every alley, every frozen bench. It was a version of him no one else had ever seen, stripped of title, stripped of armor. Just a man trying to make something right. By mid-afternoon, there was still no sign. Then Mallory got a call. A woman from a flower shop downtown, closed for the holidays, said she'd seen someone collapsed outside that morning, but by the time she came back with help, the woman was gone. Mallory froze. "Which flower shop?" she asked. 10 minutes later, she was there. The sidewalks were half cleared, slushy with fresh snow. The metal gate of the shop was locked, but a few crushed petals were scattered near the entrance. and just beside the bench outside, something caught her eye. A plastic sandwich bag. Inside it, a photograph. Mallory's breath hitched as she knelt and picked it up. It was a young man. Dark hair. A scruffy dog by his side. Emery's son. She remembered the picture. Emery had shown it to her on the second night. She was nearby. She had to be. Mallory ran back to the car, her heart pounding. It took less than 2 blocks before she saw it. A figure slumped near a utility pole, partially hidden behind a recycling bin. "Stop!" she shouted to the driver. She leapt out before the car had fully stopped, sprinting across the icy sidewalk. It was her. Emery was unconscious, her body curled, face pale, lips blue. "Emery!" Mallory cried, dropping to her knees. "Can you hear me?" No response. "Call an ambulance," she yelled over her shoulder. Her hands trembled as she checked Emery's pulse. Faint, but there. She brushed the snow from Emery's face, whispered her name over and over. Minutes later, the wail of sirens cut through the air. As the paramedics lifted Emery onto the stretcher, Mallory grabbed her hand. "You're not leaving me again," she whispered. "Not like this." She climbed into the ambulance beside her. Behind them, Whitaker's car pulled up. He stepped out slowly, eyes fixed on the red and blue lights flashing in the afternoon haze. He had found her, but it might have been too late. The emergency room was a blur of motion and artificial light. Pale green walls, the sterile scent of antiseptic, the quick shuffle of nurses' shoes on polished tile. Monitors beeped, codes were called overhead, and behind curtain number 5, Emery Whitlow hovered between this world and the next. Mallory stood just outside the curtain, arms crossed tightly across her chest, biting down the panic rising in her throat. She had spent years in hospitals, training in them, working in them, leading teams, calming families. But now, as she stood waiting for news on Emery, none of that experience seemed to matter. She felt helpless, small, terrified. A doctor she knew, Peter Grayson, finally stepped out, pulling off his gloves. He looked exhausted. "She's stable for now," he said softly. "Severe hypothermia, dehydration, a mild pneumonia that was worsened by the exposure. Her pulse was dangerously weak when she came in, Mallory." Mallory didn't ask for percentages or protocols. Just one thing. "Is she going to make it?" Peter gave a slow, hesitant nod. "She's strong. I've seen people not half as sick come in and give up. But she hasn't. She's fighting." Mallory exhaled, finally letting herself breathe. "She's conscious?" she asked. "Not yet. But we're warming her slowly. 4 fluids. Antibiotics. Oxygen. She's got a long road, but she's not alone anymore." Mallory's throat tightened. She nodded, pressing a hand to her chest. "She's a nurse," she said quietly. "She spent her life saving people. She deserves more than this." Peter placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Then stay close. Sometimes knowing someone's waiting is enough to keep you going." In the waiting room, Whitaker sat with both hands wrapped around a paper cup of bad coffee. He stared straight ahead, at nothing. The man who had once dictated corporate takeovers and negotiated million-dollar contracts now looked like someone lost in a memory he couldn't escape. When Mallory approached, he looked up immediately. "She's alive," she said. He nodded once, and then looked away. "I don't know how to explain what I'm feeling right now," he muttered. Mallory sat beside him. "You don't have to. She could have died out there. She nearly did." "I told you to send her away," he said, his voice flat. "I stood there and said she didn't belong." Mallory looked at him, really looked, and saw something she had never seen before. Remorse that wasn't wrapped in anger or pride. Just pain. "You didn't know her," she said gently. "I didn't want to know her," he replied. "Because if I did, I'd have to feel something. And I've spent years building walls so I wouldn't have to." He stared down into his coffee. "I thought your mother leaving me was the worst thing that ever happened to me. But this, watching someone suffer, knowing I could have done something, that's worse." Mallory didn't try to fix it. Didn't try to soften it. "She gave you the chance to change," she said. "You're the one who decides what you do with it now." He nodded again, slower this time. "I want to help her," he said. "Not just pay a bill or drop off a coat. I want to actually help her. Build something real. Not for PR. Not for the Donovan name. For her." Mallory's eyes burned with sudden tears. She nodded. "Then we'll do it together." 2 days passed. Emery remained unconscious for most of the first night. But by the second morning, just before dawn, she opened her eyes. Mallory was at her bedside, head resting on her folded arms, asleep in a chair. Emery stirred, her fingers twitching slightly, and the movement woke her. She sat up instantly, blinking through sleep. "Emery!" The older woman's lips were dry, but her voice, though faint, was clear. "Didn't think I'd see you again." Mallory smiled through tears. "You almost didn't." Emery tried to sit up, but winced. Mallory gently adjusted her pillow and touched her arm. "You're okay," she said. "You're safe." Emery looked around the hospital room, recognizing the surroundings. "Did I make it to the pearly gates? Or is this just a really expensive hallucination?" Mallory laughed. "It's a private room at Anchorage General. Close second." There was a pause. Then Emery looked directly into her eyes. "You came after me," she said softly. "I told you I would." "Why?" Mallory didn't blink. "Because no one should have to vanish without someone coming to find them." A tear slid down Emery's cheek, the first she had let fall in years. Mallory wiped it away gently. "You don't have to do this alone anymore." Later that afternoon, Whitaker entered the room for the first time. He wore a suit, but his tie was missing, and his jacket hung over one arm. He looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in posture, like the weight of all he had ignored was now visible on his shoulders. Emery looked up as he stepped inside. "Didn't expect to see you," she said, her voice still scratchy but strong. Whitaker nodded. "I didn't expect to be here." He pulled a chair closer and sat down, his hands resting on his knees. "I said some things. I made judgments I had no right to make. And I don't know how to fix that." Emery tilted her head slightly. "You don't start with fixing. You start with facing." He nodded, taking it in. "I was scared," he admitted. "You reminded me of everything I try not to think about. Vulnerability. Loss. The fact that I've become a man who sees people as problems instead of stories." Emery didn't respond right away. Then she said, "It takes more strength to face your emptiness than it does to hide behind your empire." Whitaker's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't look away. "I want to help you," he said. "Not because I feel guilty. Because I see you now." Emery looked at him, her expression unreadable for a long moment. Then finally she said, "Then start by sitting here. Just sit. Be with me. That's how we begin." So he did. He stayed. And as the snow fell outside, soft, silent, unbothered by the weight of what was happening inside, something long frozen between them began to thaw. Not out of pity. Not out of debt. but out of recognition. Two lives that had collided by chance, now beginning the slow, careful process of choosing not to let go. New Year's Eve in Anchorage brought with it a hush that seemed to settle over the entire city. Snow continued to fall in soft layers, muffling the streets, covering every rooftop, every sidewalk, every sign of the year that had passed. The world looked reborn, cleaner somehow, quieter, as if inviting people to begin again. Inside the Donovan home, the fireplace crackled gently, wreaths still hung on the windows, and the smell of cinnamon and pine lingered from the holidays. But this time, the warmth wasn't just from the heat. It was something deeper, something alive. At the center of it all, in a room that had once served as a second guest suite but had now been carefully transformed, sat Emery. Not on a cot, not wrapped in rags, but in a soft blue armchair, wearing a simple but elegant dress, navy, long-sleeved, a gift from Mallory. Her hair was combed back neatly, her face fuller than it had been in weeks. A thin gold bracelet, one Mallory had pulled from her own jewelry box, adorned her wrist. Across the room, Whitaker adjusted the champagne glasses on the dining table, not because a staff member wasn't available, but because he wanted to. Every small act had meaning now. Every movement was part of something he'd long forgotten. Presence. The house was alive with preparation. Mallory's children ran through the halls in socks, laughing as they dodged streamers and balloons. Mallory moved from room to room, checking on the food, lighting candles, fluffing pillows. But she always circled back to Emery. "How's the dress?" she asked, crouching beside her. Emery smiled. "I've worn uniforms most of my life. But this makes me feel like someone again." "You never stopped being someone," Mallory said. "Maybe not to you," Emery whispered. "But I forgot." Mallory took her hand. "Then tonight's about remembering." Emery nodded slowly, her gaze moving across the room, soaking it in. She still couldn't quite believe where she was. How far she'd come in just a matter of days. From near death on a frozen street to being embraced by a family she had once comforted as a stranger. She wasn't a guest here. She was wanted, needed, loved. The children had taken to calling her Aunt Em without prompting. It started when Mallory explained that Emery had once helped their mom through something very sad. After that, it was like they had known her their whole lives. Whitaker had arranged everything, quietly, without speeches or grand gestures. A modest apartment, warm, close by, with furniture chosen carefully by Mallory. A monthly pension. Private in-home care for the days her lungs felt weak. But more than that, he had offered her respect. Not pity, not charity, just dignity. And Emery, after days of hesitation, had accepted. Not for the safety it gave her, but for the look in his eyes when he offered it. That night, as the clock neared midnight, the family gathered around the table. No cameras, no press, just people. Mallory raised a glass. "To the new year," her boys chimed in, "and to new family." Emery chuckled, raising her own glass of sparkling cider. Her hand shook slightly, but her smile didn't falter. Whitaker stood last. He looked at Emery, directly, openly. "To second chances," he said, "and to those who remind us that it's never too late to do the right thing." Emery met his gaze. No one else in the room mattered for a moment. "To being seen," she added softly. And with that, the glasses clinked. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8. Emery closed her eyes. 7, 6, 5. Mallory slid an arm around her shoulder. 4, 3. Whitaker reached over and gently placed his hand over Emery's. The room erupted with cheers. No fireworks, no loud music, just warmth, presence, redemption. In the weeks that followed, Emery settled into her new life one quiet day at a time. She visited the flower shop where she had collapsed, leaving behind a small bouquet and a note that read, "Thank you for noticing." She returned to the hospital, not as a patient, but as a volunteer, sitting beside other grieving women in the maternity ward, saying little, holding hands, just like she had once done for Mallory. She walked to the Donovans' house every Sunday for dinner, brought muffins on Saturdays, read bedtime stories to the boys. She was no longer invisible, no longer discarded. Her name, Emery Whitlow, became part of the family's rhythm. And for Whitaker, who had once believed legacy was measured in buildings, trucks, and numbers, the lesson came quietly, but permanently. Sometimes, your greatest legacy is the person you choose not to ignore. On the first day of spring, Emery sat by the lake behind her new apartment. The ice had finally melted. The sun warmed her face. She held a photograph in her lap, the one of David and the dog. It was now framed. Next to it was another photo, her, Mallory, and the boys, taken just a week ago. In both photos, she was surrounded by love. Not one soul walked past her without a nod or a smile. A life once forgotten was now fully, finally, remembered. And if you liked this story, you'll surely love the next one appearing on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave your like, and turn on notifications. See you next time.